Hello, my name's Hatter, and this is a test video for the new channel Drunk Doctor Who, where a couple of friends and I are going to be watching Doctor Who serials in order from the very beginning, and we are going to be drinking while we watch them, and then afterwards we will be discussing them for you on video while drunk. We'll be putting these on the webpage that if you have found this video, you're on, obviously. But what I'm going to do with this test video, because unlike my other ones, I already have everything set up more or less for all of the viewing. And we have a nice little space over here with couches and a granite coffee table and all my Doctor Who videos, which you will see in subsequent videos. This one, however, I have framed at a different spot in the room, specifically so I can do an intro to Doctor Who for those who do not know anything whatsoever about Doctor Who. It will also be a test for the video camera, both in terms of the length of time that I can shoot in terms of the video and in audio quality. And in file size, because it's a 4K camera, I'm going to see exactly how big this file gets, how much room it'll take up on the computer, and how long it will take to upload to YouTube. So it's a test all the way around. And I may or may not leave this up forever, but I also do want to make it an introduction to Doctor Who. So A, that I have something to talk about for the next half hour, however long it takes, and B, so that it's interesting. Anyway, Doctor Who. Doctor Who was a show started in 1963, and it ran continuously until 1989. During these years, you had what are called seasons, like we normally have here in the United States, and what apparently they used to have in Europe. I don't know if they technically adopted this term for the BBC, but it is used to distinguish between the 20th century Doctor Who, specifically up to 89, and the 21st century Doctor Who, to denote different runs of the show. Okay, and they had, obviously, was it 26 seasons? They were of varying lengths of episodes. Sometimes the episodes were half an hour. For the vast majority of the time, they were half an hour. But there was one season where they were an hour long. Most of the seasons run approximately 25 or so episodes, 26 episodes for the season. However, in the 60s, you got 44 episodes a season. This was very common in the 1960s, when repeats were much less common, reruns. In fact, this is why Gunsmoke, despite having a lot fewer seasons of The Simpsons, held on to the record for the most episodes for a scripted TV show in the US for so long, because in the 60s, in black and white, when Gunsmoke was done, they simply had many, many, many more episodes. Now, when you got to 1970, and the BBC switched from black and white to color for Doctor Who, there were other shows that switched earlier, but Doctor Who switched in 1970. It was trimmed down from 42, 43 episodes a season to 26-ish, 25, 26, sometimes 27. Then, later on in the 80s, it was trimmed down again from the approximately 26 episodes a season to 13. Now, the very first season, they went from half an hour episodes to 1 hour episodes. I say half an hour, 23, 24 minutes to about 45, 48, 50 minutes. About the same length as US shows, but they just didn't have the commercials in it. So it translated well, and they brought it over to the US because they put commercials in it. Well, most of the time it was shown on PBS, so there were no commercials anyway. But That's about the length of most shows. If you look at The Simpsons, one of my other favorite shows, most of the episodes these days are like 22, 23 minutes, and including the credits. A lot of times these shows will be a little bit longer, 25, 26 minutes. Then, after that 1 year of hour-long episodes, they went back down to half an hour, but kept the 13 episodes or so. So the number of episodes continuously diminished during the course of time. Then, after the seasons, you had 1996. You had the TV movie. This is the first revival of Doctor Who. It was done in a joint effort between Fox and either the BBC or the Canadian BBC, I forget which. And it was aired on Fox, and it was going to be the pilot for the continuation of the show, because the show had so many fans and they hated seeing it being canceled. That Fox was going to take advantage of that fan base to continue the show. There were several problems with this premise, however. The first of all was the show's pickup was completely dependent on its ratings, which makes sense. However, they aired the very first episode, the pilot episode, against the very last episode of the original run of Roseanne. Bad move. Roseanne was a very popular show. Inferior, in my opinion, to Married with Children, but yeah, that's a whole different thing. Anyway, Roseanne was incredibly popular. The nation watched Roseanne, with fewer of them, of course, watching Doctor Who. If they had aired it against a regular episode of Roseanne, or even yet a less popular show, then we could have seen a full revival here in '96. However, it didn't happen. Now, in 2005, the show began again, the second revival. There was a lot of speculation as to whether it would be a revival or a reboot. And in the beginning, it was unclear. It looks as if they wanted to make it a reboot, where it would ignore the history that it had in the 20th century. However, within a couple of series or seasons, there was enough of a fan cry to acknowledge its history that it was made evident and obvious and very much declared that it was a revival and a continuation of the show. So 2005 to present. Now, for those of you watching this video that's not anywhere near now, I should denote the present. It is currently the May, not the 5th of May, but it is May 28th of 2018. Let me just set that aside. That is not, for any Britons watching this or Europeans, it's not the 5th day of the 28th month. It's obviously American, May 28th, 2018. Now, in this 05 to 2018, the present, we have had 10 series. Now, they restarted the numbering with the series in the beginning, partly because, like I said, they wanted to differentiate it from the 20th century stuff, and there was question as to whether or not it was a revival or a reboot. So, starting with 1 again instead of 27 or 28, if you want to include the TV movie as a season, was one of those factors that we didn't know. However, they did give it a different type, which is a series. Now, that may be because, I don't know if this is official BBC policy, I don't know if this is simply the way things are done then as compared to now, but back in the day with the seasons, everything pretty much seemed to be always continuing. The show didn't have to have a mandate to be revived every season. It was like most American TV shows. You just assumed it was going to continue unless it was specifically canceled. And if it was canceled, then it was canceled. But there was no question usually that it would be on the next year. The show just continued and continued and continued. one of the reasons it was eventually canceled was because by the mid-'80s it had become an embarrassment to the BBC because the show had declined drastically in quality. They weren't getting the same level of actors, writers, showrunners. It was a downward spiral of, the show's quality diminished, so we couldn't get as good of people, so the show's quality continued to diminish, etc. And they tried to kill it off in the mid-'80s during the Sixth Doctor's tenure. Doctor Who has multiple doctors. I'll explain it in a minute. But anyway, so they tried to do that, and they gave the show, but there was a big public outcry, and the show came back after a brief hiatus that did not see the show off the air for an entire calendar year. It was a 15-month hiatus that went over a couple of years, but in both of those years it was shown. And by the end of that run, the show's budget was so small that the Doctor would sit alone in the dark because the TARDIS, which is the Doctor's phone box, which is his time machine, I'll explain that later, was so shabby that he sat alone in the dark so you couldn't see how bad the set was. I mean, that's just sad. Anyway, with the series as opposed to the seasons, there's no guarantee that the show's going to be on the next year, which seems really bad to me. Now, in the US, things do get renewed every year. Sometimes they get renewed for multiple years. Like The Simpsons was renewed for seasons 29 and 30 at the same time. Big Bang Theory was renewed for 3 seasons at the same time. Not all that common, but there's not fear that the show will not be on the next year. For Doctor Who, during the just recent era, which would be the showrunner Moffat's era. I'll explain showrunners in a bit. This is a lot of information, I know. But in Moffat's era, especially, the show would be off for a year at a time. And all you would get, if you were lucky, you would get the Christmas special, and that was it, which is sad for a show. You expect a show, at least in the US, to have 20-something episodes a year, although with the advent of the BBC stuff and a whole lot of online streaming services like HBO, things of that nature, Netflix, shows are having fewer and fewer episodes per season, which is really sad to me. I mean, I just got into Rick and Morty, and there's only 11 episodes in the first season, and I was like, well, maybe it was like when The Simpsons started. Maybe it was a mid-season startup, and the next season will have 20-something episodes. But I looked, and once again, only like 11 or 12 or 13 episodes. Game of Thrones, another classic, 10 episodes a year. Now, I understand Game of Thrones is ludicrously expensive, but to get only 10 or 11 or 12 episodes of a show in a year, and then have to wait an entire other year, it just blows my mind. I got used to, as a kid, seeing the show pretty much every week. You'd have a new one. You'd have reruns in the summer, but you were outside playing in the summer anyway. It didn't matter. But you would have weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and months. 6 months out of the year, you'd have new episodes. Occasionally, the show would be overridden by football or, something big like a presidential announcement, press conference, whatever. But generally speaking, you'd have a new episode for a good portion of the year, 6, 7, 8 months, and it would only be reruns in the summer. With this, I mean, even if you binge watch a season, you can do it very, very quickly, which is sad, but I guess that's modern TV programming, just like the modern movies. All the movies cost astronomical figures to produce anymore, so they make fewer of them. But anyway, so 25 to present, 10 series. Notice that's 13 years, but only 10 series. We've skipped a couple of years, and we had one series that was broken up in 2 parts over subsequent years. All right, but as you can see, the show has a long history, 50 5 years. Now the show has a lot of episodes, 840 episodes, I believe, at the time of this writing, time of this video. Okay. The vast majority of those episodes are, of course, in this time frame. This was a whole one episode. They showed the pilot, didn't get enough ratings because they had it against Roseanne. And then this has a decent number of episodes, but nothing compared to the original, partly because it ran for much longer, partly because it was on every single year, and partly because they had at least twice as many episodes, if not 3 or more times as many episodes, for the vast majority of the seasons. All right. Now the doctors, as I said, hold on. With this many episodes, it can seem incredibly daunting to watch all of them. And not all of them exist, which is a sad tale. Okay? Out of those 840 episodes, there's approximately 96 missing episodes. Those episodes were lost during the BBC's junking policy of the 1970s. After the Second World War, it took a long time for the United Kingdom to recover. The war devastated a good chunk of Europe horribly. And unlike the United States, where we were mostly immune from attacks during the war, Pearl Harbor excepted, and some little things in Alaska from over Russia that were so small nobody remembers them. But besides that, we were not physically devastated. The United Kingdom, as well as a large chunk of Asia, portions of Africa, and of course most, if not all, of Europe, were incredibly devastated. It took forever for their economies, their cultures, their civilization's way of life to recover in a lot of ways. And in many cases, like the Soviet side of things, the USSR and Eastern Europe, it took 50 years, you know? I mean, some of them are still recovering today in many ways. Although, thank goodness that the wall and everything fell, and was it 89, 90, and everything eventually got back to reasonably normal over time. Reintegration in Germany and all that. Anyway, I'm getting off on the point. So the BBC, in order to save money, junked episodes of Doctor Who. They used to not put them on film, generally speaking. There's a couple of exceptions. But they would film them on videotape because the videotape was cheaper. And eventually, in an era before reruns really happened, in an era when, before realistically VCRs, there were some in the 60s. They were stupid expensive. Nobody had them. But in an era before all of that, there was not seen to be any value to the episodes because they were unlikely to ever be mass produced. Once again, this was before VCRs really, and DVD players and Blu-rays, before the internet and streaming. And they were not going to, generally speaking, re-air them for many reasons. One was people wanted the current fresh stuff. Although it's kind of silly because today we have thousands of cable channels. Back then there was like 4 channels in Europe, or in England, the United Kingdom. But there was like the BBC 1, 2, 3. I'm not even 100% sure when 3 and 4 came along. But there were just a few channels, and they had a limited amount of space and time for on-air, for broadcasting. And they usually wouldn't waste it with a repeat. Although, oddly enough, the first episode was repeated the very next week, and I'll explain that in a bit. Tragic, funny story. Anyway, water. So anyway, these episodes were junked. The tapes were rewritten over. Sometimes the stuff was just lost physically. There were different groups at the BBC that thought that other groups, the other one was taking care of archival purposes. So, this group thought that Group A was archiving things, and Group A thought Group B was archiving things. In fact, at one point there was like 150, 160 episodes missing. However, the show was so popular that a lot of these episodes were transferred to film, since there was no universal format for videotapes or for any sort of copies being made except for film. These days we have Blu-ray, which is fairly universal, and 4K, which is fairly universal. In fact, they're so universal we have to divide the regions artificially. But back then, there were things like PAL, which is like 600 something lines, was used over there. NTSC, which was used in America, which is like 575 lines, something like that. I don't know the exact numbers, or I've forgotten them at the moment. But a lot of different places would have a lot of different numbers of lines. It wasn't until the modern age that we've universalized everything. In fact, there was a large movement over the course of the last century, the 20th century, to slowly but surely universalize everything. And they did a pretty good job of it so that you could go from one country to another and things would be more or less the same. And this is how we got the euro in Europe, European Union, and the money, the euro. And this is how the metric system is pretty much worldwide except for the United States. We just kind of do our own thing. I think it's us, Zimbabwe maybe, Myanmar, I don't know. There's like us and two tiny countries that don't use the metric system. 2 or 3. I think one may have switched over finally. But anyway, so this big universal format went throughout the entire world over the course of the 20th century, and lately there's been a few pullbacks from the universal stuff. Politically, from the European Union, the United Kingdom is leaving, stuff like that, Anyway, so luckily, some of these films that were literally taken around Africa, sometimes on bicycle, to go to different stations, to be shown in different areas, and Australia, and some in China, partly because a lot of these areas spoke English, thanks to the colonization of the British Empire. So there were places in Africa, long before the empire was dismantled after the Second World War, and places like India, Australia, Israel, and several others all across the world were given their independence, Zimbabwe, just things like that. But these places had British people there, and they spoke English. Especially India is a great example of it, even though it's not a native tongue there like it is in Australia. Well, for the British people who moved to Australia, it's native, not the indigenous people, the Aborigines. But a lot of people in India learned English, and so they took the Doctor Who episodes and they showed them around the world. Now, a lot of these films made it back, so that there have been shown, or there have been found in a bunch of different countries, different serials that were once to be thought lost and wiped forever. And thank the Lord, we have people whose job it is, or passion, desire it is, to go around and search for these films, these episodes. Now, some of those episodes have little trims in them, especially from Australia, they were very much against violence. They trimmed out all the violence from their episodes. Doctor Who has an interesting history with violence in TV. Long story to all that. Caused a lot of problems, especially in the 70s and 80s, from English and other parts of the UK, from their TV watching groups. Anyway, in a funny part, some of the little bits and pieces we have from some of the still missing episodes are actually the edits from the Australian editors. So we're missing the entire episode in some cases, except literally the most violent parts, which is the only thing that survived because somebody took them home. Anyway, some of these episodes have been found in TV stations in Africa, some from Australia. I think there were some in Hong Kong or whatever, but a lot of them have made it back to the BBC. And some of them were found relatively recently, within the last 5 years, although most of them were found in the 80s and 90s and last decade, the noughts, after a big call went out for it, after people realized that this junking policy was destroying a national treasure, Doctor Who, because people loved this program from literally the second serial that ever took place back in 1963, the Daleks. Since then, it has been a giant hit with ups and downs and ratings and quality and everything, but it has had a cult following since almost literally the very beginning. But so they sent out a big call and people have been looking for all these episodes all of these years, and many of them have made it back. So there are only 96, I believe, episodes which are currently missing, and a lot of those have been animated. What happened was there were kids, like 4 of them in particular. I don't know their names at the moment. I didn't make notes for this presentation. I'm simply going off my head, top of my head, because this was a spur of the moment whim thing. Anyway, these 4 kids sat in front of their TVs with tape recorders to record the program so they could listen to it back later, because like I said, VCRs were almost non-existent at the time. For all intents and purposes, they were non-existent. But the kids would sit in front of there with their microphones, record this show onto cassette tape, and then play it back later. And some of these kids had all of the episodes. So in the 70s, when they figured out all this was going on, and they sent out the call for anything Doctor Who that was missing, these kids, who are now more into adulthood, brought forth their tapes and said, if you can use these, please. And so sound transcribers took all 4 collections and any others that anyone else had brought in, and they made the best possible audio renditions from those recordings. So even if we don't have the video, we still have the audio for every single episode, which is awesome. Now, unlike the United States, where we kept pretty much everything ever because we weren't as devastated as the United Kingdom at that time, and because over here ours is for making as much money as possible. We have more of a capitalist system for our TV, whereas in the UK it's more of a government system where they collect a fee for your TV every year, which I find very strange, but it's the way they do it. And then they use those fees to make TV programs. And they use the more popular shows to, in theory, subsidize the less popular shows. We have kind of the same thing with PBS, but to an infinitely smaller extent. We do use tax money for public broadcasting stations, PBS, but we have a very, very, very large capitalistic system that supports the small, much smaller government system. But anyway, so we have every episode of the original Star Trek, for instance. We have every episode of The Munsters. I think we have every episode of Gunsmoke. These old TV shows. You want to go back far enough, things like Bonnie and Clyde and stuff. Whereas over there, they chunked a lot of these episodes to save money. Because once again, they had a very limited budget. But anyway, so a lot of the stuff made it back. Some were found in what they call boot sales, which what we Americans would call flea markets or giant garage sales. Their boot sale, which refers to the trunk of a car. We call a trunk, they call a boot. They have big get-togethers, and we still do that a lot here in the United States occasionally, and we'll call them trade days if you're West Texas where I am, or we will call them flea markets if it's more of a permanent setup. Anyway, some of them were found there. Some of them were found in private collections, just literally from all over the world. But anyway, so they have all the audio. So even the episodes that don't exist, many of them have been animated. The first ones that were animated were ones to fill in gaps, where they would have like a 6-episode serial, and they were missing episodes 2 and 3. They would animate episodes 2 and 3, so you'd have a continuous visual story. And they put that out on DVD. And there have been recently some full animations. Well, one full animation, Power of the Daleks. The second Doctor's, I'll explain the Doctors here in a bit. The second Doctor's first serial is fully animated. Hopefully, I mean, this number, at this point, I guess, of episodes that don't have the original video and have not been animated as of yet would probably be about half that number, 40 to 50. So we have some serials, which a very few, which still have no currently existing video for them whatsoever, but mostly they are bits and pieces of serials that have some episodes there and some not, such as the serial The Crusades, 2 missing, 2 in existence, or the Daleks' Master Plan, 3 existing, 9 missing. And none of those episodes have been animated. Hopefully, prayerfully, they will eventually get around to animating all the rest of those episodes, so that at least until hopefully they're eventually found, we at least have some video to watch. Now there are third-party people, fans mostly, who have made video reconstructions of the missing episodes. All of them originally, but you only would have to worry about the ones that haven't been animated, because you want to go real episode, animation, and then reconstruction only if necessary, of all the missing episodes. And they are fantastic. Some are better than others, but at least you have some visual to go with the audio. And they have the visual clips that do exist in there, edited in. For the parts that don't exist, they use things like publicity photos, TV stills, which is people who took a picture of their TV with a camera while it was showing Doctor Who, just so they could have some pictures to go with the audio that they were using the tape recorder to tape. Things like that. Or sometimes they would use bits from other serials where the Doctor was in a particular pose or whatnot. Now, of these missing episodes, they really destroyed mostly the first, second, and third Doctor. There were, I do not believe, any missing from fourth, which is, the fourth Doctor was the Doctor at the time, so there couldn't have been any from the later ones. And of course, after they stopped the junking policy, they've kept everything. They haven't junked anything else. And there were a lot of other shows that were affected by this. Can't name the name of any of them because none of them mattered as much to me as Doctor Who. But I think Who's in the Army or something like that. Several other shows had a bunch of episodes that were junked, and some of them have been found. Who's in the Army or something Dad or I don't know. Anyway, but since they have the episodes in all of them in some form or another, it is possible to watch from the very, very beginning and go all the way through to current day, or what will be the current day when you get there. We are going to do exactly that. I have a couple of different Doctor Who watching groups already, one of which we've been watching a couple of episodes a week, and we are only now on the fourth Doctor, after 7 years. This is because the Doctors back then had a lot more episodes, especially the first four doctors. The fourth doctor, Tom Baker, my favorite doctor. I'll explain the different doctors in a little bit. By my first and favorite, has by far the most episodes, like 170 or 190 or something like that. And then it goes to the first doctor, I believe the second, and then the third doctor. Because there were so many more episodes per season in the 60s. And for the first and second doctor, and because the fourth doctor, Tom Baker, was there for 7 seasons. And the third doctor, Pertwee, was there for 5 seasons. But anyway, so we're going through slowly but surely and watching all of them. Now, we're watching 2 episodes a week, which means most serials will take many weeks. And we've had several hiatuses, breaks for holidays especially, vacations, etc., illnesses, the birth of a child, stuff like that. So that group is like a 15-year watching project, which may drag out to 20. And I'll be 50 this year, so I hope I get to see it all. I mean, I have literally seen every single episode of Doctor Who, but I mean, I hope I get to see it all with the group. This group, we're going to be watching things as a serial. So it'll be 4, 6, 7, 10, however many episodes are in the serial, we watch the entire serial at once. Obviously, the longer the serial, the more drunk we will probably be when we come in here to talk about it. Although we may have to temper it. Obviously, you don't want to drink so much you pass out and can't talk about the show. You do want to be nice and intoxicated. A little more than tipsy. You want to be drunk, hence Drunk Doctor Who. But you don't want to be completely wasted. And you want to be able to form a coherent discussion. Although half of the fun may be the non-coherent parts of the discussion. But you generally want to be able to form a coherent discussion about the show. But since we will be doing it in serial-length chunks, of which many seasons especially, are, a lot of them are anywhere from 4 to 8 serials. The early ones, of course, with more episodes had more serials. The later ones, when you get to like the Tom Baker era, had 6. You would have 26 episodes, 5 serials of 4 episodes each, and then the last one was 6 episodes. Like right now, in my original Doctor Who watching group, the one that we've been doing it for 7 years, since 2011, we are on the Talons of Weng Chiang, which is the finale for that season, so it's 6 episodes instead of 4 like all the others. But we will watch them in chunks of serial so that we will be getting through it much more quickly. In fact, this project, I keep pointing that way because that's where my shelf of all the Doctor Who DVDs is. This project will take approximately 7 years, and we may be done with it before we're done with the group that started 7 years ago, because we will be going at a faster pace. Also, we will be doing, when appropriate, as we go through the spin-offs. Doctor Who has had 5 spin-off shows. The first one was the Sarah Jane K9 and Company. Let's see. K9 and Company. Alright. This was a spin-off in 1980, 81? I have to double check my notes. They're in the other room. I didn't write any notes for this, but I have a big, detailed deal of when all the episodes came out, when they were originally aired, when we've watched them, all of the, it's a notebook. Here, I'll go get it. Be right back. Hold on. Okay, here's the notebook. I don't know what you can see from there, but it has every single episode of Doctor Who. Let's see. Yes, I'm correct, 840. Listed out. It has the original air date for that episode. its number in the show as a whole, and the title of the episode, and the title of the serial, where applicable. For a long time, at the very beginning, all the episodes had names, and the serials had names. And then, somewhere in the second or third Doctor, no, the first Doctor, during Hartnell, they stopped naming each individual episode. And it just said, whatever the serial name, episode 2, episode 3, and less creative, When they came back during the second revival, they went ahead and started naming the episodes again. So even if it is a 2 or a 3-parter, the modern stuff isn't really serialized the way the old stuff was. The old stuff was very directly serialized one after the other. Even when there were breaks, season breaks, whatever, it was still very, this week followed the week before, followed the week before, etc. This stuff is more episodic, which means you could almost take out each episode individually and just watch that. In fact, there are some episodes that are amazing to do that with. Blink is a modern example of that. If you want to know, if you like Doctor Who, and you don't want to watch it with us, like going through from the beginning, if you want to try the 20th century stuff, watch City of Death with my favorite Doctor, Tom Baker, and one of my favorite companions of his, Romana too. Sarah Jane, of course. I love Sarah Jane, but Romana. Anyway, Romana too. But also, I had such a crush on her when I was a kid. Anyway, also, and that's, watch that one. It is a great super encapsulation of distillation of the essence of Doctor Who into a serial. And if you like that, you will like Doctor Who. If you don't like that, especially because it was written by Douglas Adams, you're not going to like Doctor Who. Now, for the modern stuff, Blink is a great episode just to try. Because even though it's a Doctor Light episode, it contains all the fun craziness of Doctor Who. From, time travel to trying to figure out how you can make the best of a bad situation, to just trying to survive, and of course running. There's lots of running in every Doctor Who. But they're both really good stories, have a lot of heartbreak. Anyway, so this is like every single episode ever, all the spin-offs. And when we get to the spin-offs, we will watch them. And you're familiar with other shows having spin-offs like Happy Days, spun off Laverne and Shirley, and Mindy, actually. But first one was K9 and Company. It was 1981, between the 4th and 5th Doctors. And it had one episode, the pilot, called The Girl's Best Friend. And then it, once again, just like the TV movie, the 96 revival, was simply not really picked up. The second one, which is called The Sarah Jane Adventures, which stars both K9 and Sarah Jane, just like K9 and Company. Sarah Jane Adventures. Was really, really good. It was, Doctor Who. Let's see. Doctor Who by the 20th century. It originally started out as a children's show. It was for little kids. The little kids that, if you know nothing about Doctor Who, in the 60s would hide behind the couch while watching the show to, so they could hide during the scary parts. It was designed for little kids. Now, it was scary. But apparently mostly scary to little kids. Then it became more and more graphic in the violence. You would have an episode where somebody would shoot somebody, but of course there's no blood or anything, as was the norm back in the 60s, and in many ways is better than the insane graphic violence we'll get from movies 300, different style, But by the Tom Baker era, the violence got big enough that they switched it from a children's show to a family show. So by the time it got to, it wasn't just for little kids. It's more of the whole family should watch it together so the parents could, I guess hide the kids' eyes or send them out of the room when things got bad. This happened in the mid-'80s. By the time it got to the 20th century, of course, you're going to have scarier things, bigger budgets, more questionable material. It's not going to be something necessarily for little kids to watch. So they made Sarah Jane Adventures. Sarah Jane Adventures is more geared towards those little kids, the way the show was originally, and is less complicated, less intricate, and gives the younger kids younger sidekicks to look upon as heroes and to want to emulate. But this has a lot more of the feel of the 1960s, especially the 1960s original feel of the show. Really good. Ran 5 series, as this, once again called series because this happened this century. And unfortunately, the actress died. One of the most beloved, if not the most beloved, companion for Doctor Who, Sarah Jane, died. Unfortunately. Now, the funny part was one of her sidekicks or companions in this show was K9, and the first one was named K9 and Company, with K9 as the lead, obviously, but she was in it. And then Sarah Jane Adventures, which was named after Sarah Jane, but K9 was in it. And the gap here is from 81 to 07. Let me see. See, now I have notes. This is great for reference, although may not look as good on camera. Let's see. Oh, silly me. How in the world could I ignore? Torchwood came first. Anyway, so here's the more kids show. Torchwood, which actually came before Sarah Jane Adventures, but mine jumped to Sarah Jane Adventures because we were talking about K9 and Company. Alright, Torchwood which, if you haven't noticed yet, is actually an anagram of Doctor Who. DOCTORWHO. So the anagram of Doctor Who is the more adult show. So while Doctor Who here is for families, this is more for the kids. This is more for adults. Nudity, not explicit sex, you can't really show that, but the mentioning of and the having of sex, just not on camera, but it's very sexualized, and deals greatly with 21st century stuff, not the traditional, the old school 1960s, just male female. You've got all sorts of sex here, bisexuality, homosexuality, whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just a 21st century take on as opposed to the 20th century take. Back here, the doctor to even be implied to have any of that, to have any sort of sexual tension for any of his companions was verboten. This was a kids show and then a family show. In fact, the 5th Doctor was so young, he wasn't allowed to put his arm around his female companions lest he be thought of making a pass at them or getting too friendly. Now, starting in 96 with the TV movie, in 96, the Doctor and his female companion kiss. And that was the first time that ever happened on the show. By the current stuff, even in Doctor Who, not just Torchwood, but in the main show, the Doctor and his companions fall in love. They romanticize, they bring romance and sexuality into the show in a way that was just inconceivable, especially in the 60s, Times have changed. What do you know? We have a more modern 21st century show. with more modern sensibilities and approaches to things. And much in the same way that Star Trek broke, it was the first interracial kiss on TV in the original series between Hulu and Kirk. In some ways, this breaks new ground. There you go. Science fiction leading the way. Anyway, Torchwood, fantastic spin-off. K9 Company is an okay episode, although the theme song for it is so bad and cheesy. So bad. The intro is just bad. Sarah Jane is good, really good for the kids. Fantastic. You want younger kids to get them into the show. Sarah Jane Adventures is awesome. 5, 6, 7 years old. Torchwood, I don't know if I would have your kids watching it till maybe 14 or so. It's very mature. Very mature. It's good, but it's mature. Kind of like Game of Thrones. Well, not that explicit. Nothing's as explicit as Game of Thrones for TV mostly, anyway. But it is really good. The first 2 seasons take a while to, get their feet on the ground. But there's some really good episodes. The 3rd series is called Children of Earth and is absolutely fantastic. One of the best things ever put on television. The 4th series, once again, whenever we Americans get involved with Doctor Who, we mess it up. Wasn't as good, although my wife really likes it. That's called Miracle Day. But just like the TV movie, which Americanized things in a problematic way sometimes, Miracle Day took much of what was the British essence out of Doctor Who and Americanized it a bit in such a way that it wasn't quite the same. It wasn't as good. Sort of like those British TV shows we take over and we try and remake here, and they just don't work as well because they are a British creation and it only works with British humor. The IT Crowd, wonderful example. Great British show. The American version sucked, even though it had one of the same actors. Apparently The Office works, in both places, but I can't stand that show, so I don't get it. I saw maybe 3 episodes and I wanted to break up the disc. And I was renting it from Blockbuster, so Hollywood Video, if you remember Hollywood Video. So I would have literally had to pay them for it, and I still wanted to smash it into pieces with a hammer. I just don't get that kind of humor. Everything is supposed to be funny because it's awkward, but I guess that works for the new generation. It doesn't work for me. Anyway, Torchwood, fantastic. Ran for 4 series. Various levels of quality, but the 3rd one is amazing. And we will watch these when we get there. Now, Children of Earth we'll probably watch in one go because it's only 5 episodes. We're showing on 5 subsequent nights. The others we will have to watch as 1 and 2 parters as was intended. Like I was saying earlier, the current stuff is very episodic, one-shots, but there are several 2 and sometimes 3 parters, like the Utopia trilogy. Love the Utopia trilogy. And those are watched together, just like the old serials. They'll last a couple hours, or 3 hours, or in the case of the Daleks' Master Plan, the only 12-parter ever made in the show, 6 hours, and 9 of them are reconstructions. For someone who starts at the very beginning and wants to watch all the way through, that is the brick wall for most people. If you can get past the Daleks' Master Plan, you'll make it. If you can't get past the Daleks' Master Plan, that's where everybody stops, or most of them. But anyway, so Torchwood, really good. There's also K9, which is using the same characters as in Sarah Jane, as in here, as in Doctor Who, the companion K9, which is a robot dog. In everything else, he basically looks the same. This is, I believe, an Australian spin-off because the guy who created K9 had rights to it. This is the only bit of Doctor Who canon that I have not seen. That's it. I'm going to be watching that with the wife soon. it is just very low priority. Once again, kids show like Sarah Jane Adventures, but very low priority. All the basic show I've watched, all the rest of these I've watched, this is the only thing I haven't seen. And the latest one, it's only ran for one season. The latest one is Class. Class was weird, interesting, and very problematic. Lots of potential. Didn't really go anywhere or do anything. The first 4 or 5 episodes were pretty good and was building towards something. But by the end, it was a pretty bad mess. And was canceled after the only season, the only series. It is a victim of the showrunner Moffat. I don't like the guy. The saddest part is he's an amazing writer. He wrote the episode Blink, the one I said if you want to see if you like Doctor Who in the 21st century Doctor Who, watch it. He wrote that. Great writer. As a showrunner, he really got out of hand. He really started doing many questionable things and brought the ratings way down. Everything was problematic. Nothing had any consequences. It was all so interwoven and self-referential, both to himself and the show, and it just became problematic for new people to watch, and eventually people stopped caring. I do not like Moffat. In the modern era, Russell T Davies is my showrunner of choice. In the classic era, I'm not sure if I have a specific one. But definitely not Jonathan Nathan Turner, the one who oversaw the decline at the end, although it wasn't his fault. He and Moffat were both, to their credit, I will credit them this, they were put in problematic positions because it was either walk away from the show and then nothing would be made, or oversee its decline in some ways. And I do not begrudge either of them what they did, which was to try and keep the show going for as long as possible, as a high level of quality as possible for as long as possible. Anyway, I'll explain showrunners in a bit. But sorry, I get off on a lot of tangents, but I love this show. All right, here's Class, latest serial or latest spin-off. Only ran one season. The same for K9. K9 Company, the one episode. So the two main ones, the two big ones, are Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood. Both ran essentially concurrent. With the 2005 to 2010 Russell T Davies era of the show as showrunner, although Sarah Jane Adventures went into the Moffat era until unfortunately she passed away. Alright, anyway, so this is the show overall. There are a few other bits. There's a couple of animated episodes. Two of which are canon, one is not. Everything in the show has been considered canon except for a single episode that was animated, was going to be the revival of the show. Literally, he'd been announced as the new Doctor, they made this animated deal, and then in the middle of making the animated episode, they decided they were going to make it live action. So this guy was declared to be the Doctor, and he was going to be the 9th Doctor, and then later they're like, nope, scrap that, we're getting a different 9th Doctor, and you're out of here. But he got to come back later as a villain, I guess that's some consolation, or a particular version of that villain. And he had once previously played the Doctor in a comedy Red Nose special, in a comic relief special. For those who are unfamiliar with comic relief or the Red Nose stuff, these are in the United Kingdom. These are specials done for a particular day where they try and get money to give to charities. In fact, the Walgreens here now does the Red Nose deals. In fact, I think It's happening right about now. But they do the Red Nose deal, and that one's specifically for children, I think, for cancer or whatnot, whereas the Comic Relief is for, I believe, broader charities, or it might be for children again, but maybe not the cancer one, or what have you. But anyway, Doctor Who has traditionally occasionally done some of those specials pretty much each time, and they're always funny because it's Comic Relief. Rowan Atkinson plays the Doctor in the 99, I believe it's 99 special, in which the Doctor regenerates. I'll explain regeneration. This is like a Doctor Who episode in and of itself. I'll explain everything later. He plays the Doctor in that, and then he dies and regenerates into several different versions of the Doctor, until at the end he regenerates into a female Doctor, who Jonathan Pryce, who plays the Master, I'll explain the Master later, finally likes her, the Doctor, he, her, whatever, her now. And this has recently happened in the show overall. The latest incarnation of Doctor Who, which we've seen only for a few seconds at the end of Series 10, is female. The first 12 Doctors, and originally in some places there were implied Doctors before that, but there's nothing substantial. And the War Doctor. So the first 13, I'll explain the War Doctor later. All right, the first 13 versions of the Doctor were all male. But now, and they haven't had an opportunity to explain how or why inside the show, the Doctor has gone female. Jodie Whittaker, she's the 13th Doctor. But anyway, so this is a show. Overall, I think total there's the 840, the main show. You have these, all the spin-offs, 2 animated episodes, and there's some non-canonical stuff, some apocrypha as well. But getting close to 1,000 episodes all told. I think there's 60 or so here. Well, I can find out actually. Torchwood has a total of 41, and Sarah Jane Adventures has a total of 53, so that's another 90. Then you have 2 animated bits for the 10th Doctor, Tennant, and then you have K9 Company 1 episode. I believe there's 20 episodes here, I'd have to double check, and Class had like 13. But yeah, so we're approaching 1,000 total episodes for the show, but the main show, 840. The same way you would not count every single Star Trek series as the main line of Star Trek episodes, because there's been 6 or 7 or 8 shows for it now, between the original, the Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, the animated series, etc. The main line is still 840 continuous episodes. But anyway, we will watch everything, including all the side stuff, eventually. Alright, now, during those years, you have, I should probably have left the Doctor Who up there. Alright, during those years, you have, so far as I mentioned earlier, 13 Doctors. And a side guy. Alright, the first Doctor was Hartnell. William Hartnell. Alright. He is old. Well, not by... He looks old. He's not... the actor was in his 50s, not what we would call old today. In fact, the actor who just stepped down from playing the Dr. Capaldi was the same age, but people don't age as fast today. Hartnell was during the Second World War. Didn't play the Doctor during the war, but like I said, things were rough in the United Kingdom back then. And he also apparently drank quite a bit. He can't cast aspersions. We're doing a drunk Doctor Who show. So But anyway, so he looked. We would think he was older than what he was based on the way people look today. But he was the first doctor, and he went from 63 until 66. Yes, 1963 to 1966. White hair, sort of gentleman's dress. Walked with a cane a lot of times, very gruff, very different. He was very knowledgeable, and he flies around in what's called his TARDIS. TARDIS. The TARDIS is still the mode of transportation for the Doctor today. It is his time and space machine. Stands for time and relative dimensions in space. Okay? And you learn this pretty much the very first episode. The Doctor and his granddaughter at the time end up with two teachers boarding the TARDIS, and they end up going on adventures. Ian and Barbara are the teachers. And these are the first three companions, his granddaughter Susan, Ian, and Barbara. And they run around the TARDIS and they have great adventures. The first one wasn't particularly good. It was with cavemen. But the second one, with the Daleks, which is the Doctor's master foes. This master foes. The Daleks' main enemies. The Daleks' other main enemy is the Master, which is why that was weird. And the Master comes along later. In terms of canon, and everyone is allowed to determine what they want to be canon for anything. Like, you watch the Star Wars movies, you don't have to read the books. You don't have to read the comic books. You don't have to do any of that other stuff. Or the video games or whatever. Some people consider all of that to be canon. I don't. I prefer everything to be in a single medium for several reasons. One, I don't want to have to read every single book or every single comic book or whatever to know what's going on. I don't want to have to play the video games to know what's going on. I don't want to have to, if I start watching the movies and then there's a TV show, I don't want to have to pay attention to the TV show. Like the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for the Marvel Universe. If I like that medium, I want to keep everything in one medium. And I consider other mediums to be other versions of that story. Classic example is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was a radio play and a novel and a TV movie and then a Hollywood movie. But each separate iteration was a different story. Same story overall, but there were different characters and different variations in each one. And the author, who I mentioned earlier, Douglas Adams, who wrote City of Death for Doctor Who, wrote each one to be different. And they were all him writing them all. He wanted everything to be different and changed it. And, great writer. Love Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Pretty much every iteration of it. But anyway, so I don't consider the comic books or for Doctor Who, there are audio plays called Big Finish, which came into being very specifically during what are called the wilderness years. Remember, I had the dates up here. Well, remember from 1990 all the way to 2004, there was only a single episode of Doctor Who in 1996. Those are commonly referred to as the wilderness years, when the fans were aching for more Doctor Who and they wanted more Doctor Who, but when the show was not being produced at all, except for the 96 TV movie. Those wilderness years created other forms of it. Luckily, during that time, a lot of the Doctor Who episodes were being put out on VHS, and then eventually some were put on Laserdisc, then eventually DVD and Blu-ray. there were also a bunch of novelizations of the episodes being done in written novel form. Some by some very famous people who, like Dick, who was a show editor or script editor for the show. He did several novelizations himself, I believe. And so people who were writers who had a hand in the show were doing the novelizations, sometimes of their own serials, their own stories, which was fantastic. There were also radio plays called Big Finish, and the Big Finish is is meaning, hey, the show's over, because they thought it was over in 1990, but this is our big finish. And so a bunch of the doctors, the actual people who played on the TV show, the doctors, made a whole bunch of the audio plays. Some people love them to death because, especially in the case of the Eighth Doctor, I'll get to him here in a minute, who was only in the one serial, but he was good. the one episode, but he was good. They wanted more of their doctors, especially that one, and that was the only way to get them, was from the audio plays. And there were comic books, the novelizations and stuff like that. But for purposes of my viewpoint, since I'm the guy doing this, you can make up your own mind if you want to get into it. I don't consider those canon. Sometimes they contradict what the show does, although so many times the show contradicts itself, so that's hard to do that. Sometimes it's stuff that's intended that never makes it into the show. The Master, who is the Doctor's main single individual, arch villain, was originally going to be the Doctor's brother. But it never made it into the show because the original guy, Delgado, who played the Master, was so good at it, he passed away in a car wreck, I believe it was a car wreck, but he died. And so they never filmed those serials where I believe they were actually going to kill the Master off. So instead, the Master lives on to this day in the show, although for a show dealing with time travel, death is a minor obstacle to overcome, like in a good D&D game, when you're high level. Anyway, so the Doctor runs around in his TARDIS, fights Daleks, he fights the Master. He has many, many other foes that you will see come into play later on. Other big classics are Cybermen, the Weeping Angels, although they're from this century, they are an absolute classic. To a lesser extent, the Silence, they never hit classic level. Once again, a Moffat thing, so much potential. They really could have been something, and then he ruins it towards the end of his run. But they have lots and lots of classic enemies that will show up again and again. Once again, Master, Daleks, Cybermen. Anyway, so the show was going along, and Hartnell was in ill health and advanced in age, even though he wasn't that old, just because of, was it Indiana Jones said, it's not the age, it's the mileage. He had some mileage on him from the Second World War and all that. And they needed to replace him on the show. So they came up with regeneration. What happens is the Doctor dies, his physical body dies, but it regenerates into a new body. And a different actor, or now actress, takes the role. So in 1966, that happened for the first time. And we have the second Doctor, Troughton, Patrick Troughton. Who was 1966 to 1969. These days, regenerations are almost always at the very end of a season or beginning of a season. Usually at the very end. A lot of times during the Christmas special, which will usually be the end of a season. Sometimes the beginning once again. Just depends on how things fall. This one was done mid-season. It was a couple of stories into the fourth season, but he took over at the end of the second serial of the fourth season. And this happens once more with the fifth to sixth Doctor. But generally speaking, it happens at the end of the season. But Troughton took over, and he was very different from Hartnell. He was a little younger, granted, he had to be. In fact, the Doctors almost always regenerate younger. For the actor. The character gets older, but the actor gets younger, usually. Not always the case. In fact, the 11th Doctor to the 12th was a big age jump. And I believe to the 5th to the 6th Doctor was a small age jump. And the 2nd to the 3rd, I believe, was a small age jump. But yeah, usually they get younger because as the actor's in that role, he's getting older, but you can't keep going older with the actors. You kind of, at some point, have to go younger. Anyway, Troughton was incredibly charismatic and wonderful in the role. He's my second favorite Doctor after Tom Baker. Now, Pertwee is absolutely fantastic. He's awesome, I admit that, but he's not my favorites. He's not one of my top three. But he is a bit of a fool, a bit of a clown. Lots of fun. Clown is a great word for him. Lots of fun. But he was there from 66 to 69. So the first 3 seasons and a little bit into the 4th were Hartnell. The finishing out the 4th and then all of the 5th and all the 6th season are Troughton. Now, during Troughton's reign, during his tenure, you find out, we find out the name of the Time Lords as Time Lords. We find out a little more about the regeneration process, very specifically in the War Games, his final serial, which was 10-parter, the only 10-parter on the show. Same way the Doctor Master Plan was the only 12-parter. And then he finishes out the Black and White era. Really good. He goes through several really good companions. My favorite, one of my favorites of all time, is one of his companions, which is oh my gosh, can't think of his name off the top of my head. The Scotsman. It'll come to me later. But it's funny because the actor who played the Scotsman, that was his companion there, now plays Troughton, because Troughton has passed away, as the second Doctor in the Big Finish audios, which is hilarious. Apparently it doesn't sound like he used to in the show, but he now sounds like dead on for Troughton in the audio stuff. Alright, let's see. Anyway, so Troughton was great, and then we go to the 3rd Doctor, also sometimes referred to as the Gentleman Doctor, Pertwee. What is Pertwee's first name? I forget. Let's see. Pertwee. Here we go. John, right? John Pertwee. Same spelling as my brother. Jon Pertwee. Alright. Now, he was in 1970 to 74, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, 74. Alright, 1974. Okay. Several changes with the show right here. Pertwee, who is Beard's favorite Doctor, the show will be consisting of myself, Beard, and Holden. He's another friend. Pertwee is Beard's favorite classic Doctor. His favorite Doctor overall, I believe, is Eccleston, who is the 9th Doctor, the first one of the modern run. Pertwee, like I said, it switched to color. They reduced the number of episodes from like 42, 43 a season, down to the norm for the 70s, which is like 24 or so. And it's still the norm today in the US for most TV broadcast shows, not cable or Netflix or internet or anything like that. But for most TV shows in the US, we still have the 20 to 24 episodes. In fact, the minimum you could syndicate a show with here in the US for the longest time, I think was 16 or 17. And so some British shows, most notably The Prisoner, would pad out a 10 or 12 episode run with a few extra episodes that they weren't planning on making originally, so that they could get syndication here in the US. If you ever get a chance to watch the original The Prisoner. Amazing. I believe that actor turned down James Bond to make The Prisoner. I hope he was happy with the decision. Obviously, Connery was an amazing first Bond that this guy could have done, but just crazy how things end up, But anyway, so they padded out that show a little bit, but the whole show is freaky, weird, awesome, quirky, as only a British show can be. Anyway, but Pertwee is great. Due to budget constraints, partly from the show going from black and white to color film was more expensive, and partly from the starting of the squeezing of the show that would eventually be its ruination in the 80s. He was originally exiled to Earth, stranded here, so that they wouldn't have to make sets for the TARDIS and sets for all these other planets. So it was to cheapen the budget a little bit. Pertwee, Jamie McCrimmon. Jamie McCrimmon is the name of the guy I love. Jamie, for Patrick Troughton's companion. He's with Troughton almost the entire way. He shows up like a serial or two in for his run. Maybe 3. But anyway, Pertwee is stuck on Earth for a good bit until they give him a budget back and he can travel. He gets his TARDIS back. And he's a very, very gentlemanly doctor. The actor was very tall, and even though he wasn't too much younger than Hartnell physically, he was much more agile and athletic. Much, much, much more. And I say not too much more. I think he was about 10 years or so younger. But anyway, so fantastic doctor. And there's a great companion. Companions are those people who travel with and help the doctor, if I haven't defined this before. They're kind of like sidekicks, although sometimes they overshadow the doctor. This is okay when it's occasionally. It sucks when it happens all the time and way too much, which is part of my problem with Moffat. His companions are gods, relatively speaking, compared to us, even to the Doctor, who's a Time Lord, who's lived for thousands of years. But these companions travel with the Doctor. They're usually taken home eventually. Sometimes they are left somewhere completely not their home, but because they want to stay. Usually that was for a female companion when they fell in love, such as his granddaughter Susan and Leela. And sometimes they're just kind of fobbed off, like, what was the name of the companion that was simply fobbed off to that one culture to make peace? It's just, here you go, I'm going to leave him. There's a male companion. It's just like, yeah, he's going to stay. He'll help you run your society. You need him, and I don't want him anymore. Poor guy. I love the character too, but he's just literally fobbed off. He's like, there you go. But very occasionally, the companions do die. Very occasionally. And sometimes, most of the ones that die are minor companions, like the Daleks' Master Plan, 12-part serial, and he's fighting his big arch nemesis. 2 companions die, but neither of them are major ones. Neither of them are ones who've been with the Doctor for very long. But occasionally you will have one very specific one that's with the Doctor for years, in a couple of incarnations of the Doctor, and dies. It's just the way the show works. And some of those moments are some of the best moments in the show. And some of the best moments are when the Doctor is willing to give up his life to save a companion, as happens many times with the 5th Doctor, off the top of my head, with the 9th Doctor, with the 10th Doctor. Love Tennant. Anyway, not my favorite, but he's like number 3 after Tom Baker and Patrick Troughton. But he gives up his life to save one of my favorite modern companions, or 21st century companions. What is sometimes referred to as New Who. Sometimes spelled N-E-W-H-W-H-O, sometimes N-E-W-H-O, but I've also seen it very frequently as N-U-W-H-O. New Who. It's a shorthand for 21st century Doctor Who. Anyway, so Pertwee was there for 5 seasons. Now he has fewer episodes than Hartnell and Troughton because there were fewer episodes per season. But he was the first one to break the on average 3-year run. And even today, 3-season run. Back then that corresponded directly to years. These days it doesn't necessarily, because we've got a lot of holes in the Moffat era. But he went for 5 years. Really good stuff. And one of my favorite companions, the Brigadier, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, starts in the Troughton era, runs through Pertwee's era because the Doctor joins a particular military organization, which is still in the show today, and keeps going pretty much all the way from Classic Who into the New Who, the current stuff, but only in the Sarah Jane Adventures. They were going to have the Brigadier show up for the actual show, but then the actor died, unfortunately. And wonderful actor, wonderful character. The name of the organization is once again, off the top of my head, can't think of it. It'll come to me in a moment, just like Jamie McCrimmon did. I'm just going over so much information. But anyway, so then the 4th Doctor, let's see, is Tom Baker. And he ran from 1974, I think I can make a 7, to 1981? 80? Ooh, I think he may have barely hit 81. Let's see. Yeah, March of 81. Barely hit 81. Oh, unit. The Brigadier's military was a unit. In the 20th century, it stood for United Nations Intelligence Task Force. United Nations. Once again, like I said, this was when everything was going to, unifying everything, like the metric system and the video deals and all that. So there was emphasis on United Nations a lot, especially after the Second World War. The League of Nations after the First World War kind of sucked. But United Nations Intelligence Task Force. By the time we get to New Who, 21st Century Who, the current revival, whatever you want to call it, I like 20th century and 21st century. It's referenced as Unified Intelligence Task Force. So they dropped the United Nations. Remember, United Kingdom it joined the European Union, but it kind of had half a foot in, half a foot out. It kept its own currency. It kept the right to leave. It kept a lot of its own laws, but it still is part of the Union. But now they've withdrawn. So once again, we lately have had a decentralization theme in the world. So instead of United Nations, it's Unified Intelligence Task Force. Anyway, but UNIT is still in the show today. Was there for mostly Pertwee and Baker on and off. Mostly because of Sarah Jane, but then a little bit later as well. But it has made a big time resurgence in the show in the current era. But anyway, love the Brigadier. And he's been replaced now by his daughter. So the Brigadier had a daughter, and she's now more or less in the place where he is on the show. Okay, he was on the show for 7 seasons, 7 years. So he, like I said, has the most episodes. My favorite Doctor, my first Doctor, the one you never forget. A lot of the DVDs are going out of print these days, but I believe all of Tom Baker's are still available, still in print. When Americans think of Doctor Who, at least last century, they will always think of Tom Baker. He's the one with the brown hat and the long multicolored scarf, the great big grin. Classic awesome guy. Now, when it comes to doctors, all of the doctors, not including the War Doctor, I'll explain him later, from Tom Baker on down are still alive. The first 3 doctors, Hartnell, Troughton, and Pertwee, have all passed on. In fact, in that order. So they literally passed away in that order, and Tom Baker's in his late 80s. He has made a couple of, you could call them cameos almost, but they're bigger than that. But he's made a couple appearances on the show, even in this day and age, which is fantastic. But given his age, he's the most likely to pass on next, and that would also continue the order. Even though with some of the large age gaps, like from 11 to 12, Smith to Capaldi, it's unlikely to always go in that order. But, I guess we'll see. I don't want any of these actors to die, but, it's life. Everyone pretty much passes on eventually. But yeah, Tom Baker, all the rest of them alive, except the War Doctor. I'll get to the War Doctor. All right. And then the 5th Doctor, which is Peter Davison. David or Davis? Let's see, Davis, I think. Yeah, Davison. 1981 to 84. And he was only there. Notice we're going back to the 3-season scenario. He's got 3 years. The vast majority of the actors have done it for 3 years. Major exceptions were McGann. The 8th Doctor was only there for the 1 episode. And Eccleston, who was there for a single season. And of course, Pertwee and Baker, who were there for 5 and 7 respectively. Davison was much younger. He was the youngest person to play the Doctor at the time. And like I said, he was the one who could put the arms around the female companions. One nice thing about the early Doctor Who is you had multiple companions at a time, and it seemed more like an ensemble cast show, and it was fun. Throughout a lot of the time later on, by the time you get to later Pertwee, well, you still always had the Brigadier there, but starting really with Tom Baker, after his male companion from his first season leaves, you have pretty much, it's a lot of the times just Tom Baker and a single companion. For a long time that was Sarah Jane Smith, later Leela, later Romana. But eventually, towards the end of Tom Baker's run, they start building up an ensemble cast again, which is nice. It feels more like a fun group effort where we'll go do this while you go do that, as opposed to one person on their own or the only 2 people together. And that's, to me, the way the show should be done now. I don't have a say in any of this. Anyway, so Davison inherits Tom Baker's ensemble cast, and it's really, really fun, really nice. And unfortunately, that falls apart again by the end of his run, and we get back down to the Doctor and a single companion, which is pretty much the norm these days again, except really recently in Series 10, and then going forward in Series 11, we're getting back into multi-companion seasons and series and Doctors again. Series 10 had 2 companions, Love the Bald Guy, Nardole, and Bill, who's female, despite the name. And then we're going to have 3 companions, like harkening back to here or here, and a bit here, for the 13th Doctor, Whittaker. Anyway, not a whole ton that we know, but we do know that. All right, 6th Doctor. 6th Doctor is Colin Baker. Oh, and even Peter Davison was young. He was... I just don't know a good way to describe him. He just wasn't Tom Baker. He was... had a lot of heart. And that was the main thing about him. A lot less violent than Pertwee and Tom were. And heck, going back to William Hartnell, beating up people in the Romans. It's the title of a serial, The Romans. But yeah, he was very, very much kind of looked a little hippie-ish, played cricket really well in the show, and acted like a young child of that era in terms of a lot more pacifistic and a lot more, we can reason it out. Although Tom Baker did a lot of that, and all the Doctors did, but he took it to interesting extremes. All right, 6th Doctor was Colin Baker. Not to be confused with Tom Baker, and no relation, but Colin Baker. He was there from 84. Oh man, he had that little stunted run, 86. 1984 to 1986. They took the Doctor in a much more dark direction. Much darker. Not more darker, but much darker direction. And it didn't work out really well. By the time you got to like him, he was already gone. Or pretty much already gone. And in fact, it was during his tenure that they first tried to kill off the show. That was that hiatus I told you about. He is later in some ways paralleled by Capaldi. They also tried to make really dark, and by the time he lightens up and you get to like him, his run's almost over. Anyway, he was the first Doctor, I believe, who wasn't there for his own regeneration. He had been so estranged from the show that they had to bring in the next Doctor and put a wig on to make him look like Colin Baker so they could do the regeneration. It was really kind of sad. I don't care for him much, but that might be the writing of the show and the decline in the show of those years, and may not necessarily be his fault. Hard to say, and you can make up your own mind when you get there, or when we get there. But yeah, there's a scene in which he's so dark, he's literally choking one of his companions to death. And it's sad, because it's a companion that Davison gave up his life and regenerated in order to save. It's really, really odd, dark character. That, and towards the end of his run, he's got a companion making him exercise and eat healthy food, and it's just not what anyone really wanted to see. One interesting note, one of his couple of seasons, he had a single story over the course of the entire season called The Trial of a Time Lord. Now, in the United States, it was broken up into 4 DVDs/VHSs or whatever. And in the United States, they each have a different production number, a different story number. But in the UK, the whole 14-episode season was given a single numbering, so that if you keep track of story numbers, this is where they will diverge for the United States and the United Kingdom. So that in the US, and according to my notes, I have a set of numbers, but by the time you get to here, it will be off by 3, because we consider it 3, 4, and they consider it 1. I think this was done for DVD numbering for collectors, and it just stuck. But there you have it. Anyway, Colin Baker. All right, and then you have the 7th Doctor, which is McCoy. What is his first name? I forget. Paul McGann. Sylvester, that's right, Sylvester McCoy. Yep. From 87 to 89. Alright, 1987 to 1989. Alright, McCoy. Interesting actor. You may have seen him in the Hobbit movies. He was Radagast the Brown. He's very much a clown. I mean, just flat out, very much a clown. In fact, you will see, in fact, I think he was a children's clown before he took the role or what have you. You'll see some of this paralleled in the 21st century Who, where Pertwee kind of revives the show and starts afresh, the same way Eccleston did. Tom Baker was immensely popular, and he came next, the same way that Tennant did. Peter Davison was a much younger Doctor, switched to that the same way that Matt Smith was. And then Colin Baker was dark and didn't have a good run, and ratings decline the same way that Capaldi did. And hopefully Whittaker, the 13th Doctor, does not follow Sylvester McCoy in the clown department, although her costume seems to lean that way. One thing about the Doctors is they each have a unique style, they each have a unique presentation, and they each have unique outfits. Now, especially in the early days, their outfits would change a lot depending on where they were going, and that still happens now. But they have very signature outfits that they wear most of the time. And each single one has that. Pertwee liked velvet and capes. Baker, of course, the hat and the long scarf and the brown deal. Unfortunately, of his 7 seasons, 6 of them were amazing, all during the 70s. The 1970s, John Pertwee and Tom Baker is generally considered the golden age of Doctor Who, just flat out. Golden age. Well, it wasn't the foundation or the beginning of it. That was the 60s, Hartnell and Troughton. The best stories from the 20th century Doctor Who. The best actors, just flat out. The best doctors. The best overarching production of the show, the writers, the directing, everything was in the 1970s. It was Pertwee and Baker. Just flat out amazing. You can easily call this the Silver Age, which works beautifully for black and white anyway. And then this, the Bronze Age, I mean, Copper, we're getting down here. The show continues a long, steady decline in quality, production value, ratings, stories. Although it's sad because right at the very end, as the show is being canceled, the quality of the show goes up again. And it, like with The Simpsons, if they'd left it running a few more seasons, I think it may have reemerged into some of its former glory. Just like with The Simpsons starting with this 20th season, once it switched over to high definition, the quality goes back up again, and it's gotten really good again. We're in the 29th season right now, and you can argue it's seeing a decline again, but whichever way, and no one can argue that it went up drastically from the seasons in the teens. Anyway, but there's a couple of classic serials in here, like Curse of Fenric, that shows how good the show is getting again, right before they cancel it. Ironically, the last one was Survival, was the name of the serial. Anyway, but hopefully Whittaker will not be the clown and everything will not repeat itself again, and the show will not be canceled again. Anyway, so classic 20th century doctors. Then you have that break, and then I will put McGann up here. The first revival and the only doctor of that revival. Hartnell film roles. I erased it, but still Hartnell film roles. He was always a soldier. You can see him in things like Carry On Sergeant, and I think You're in the Army Now. Although I've only seen Carry On Sergeant. He's more well known in the United Kingdom. Troughton had a great role in The Omen. He was the priest in The Omen. Had a great role in that. Pertwee, if you want to see him in something else, it's a small role, but I love him in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. Very small role, but he's good in it. Tom Baker. The main role I can think of for him outside of Doctor Who, in terms of movies, was the D&D movie, and don't watch it. We watch bad movies on Sunday nights, and that one's pretty bad. Oh my gosh. But anyway, so you can see some of them. Now the modern doctors, like I said, you get all the way down to Sylvester McCoy, and he's been in the Hobbit movies as Radagast. And I'm not sure Colin Baker's been in much. Davison's been in something, I don't know what. But anyway, so the first revival, you have McGann. Paul McGann. So he was the 8th Doctor. And it was just 1996. Okay. McGann, and he's been in some movies and stuff too. It was wonderful. His outfit was a bit of a throwback to the 1st and 3rd Doctors. Like I said, Gentleman Doctor for Pertwee, and he was really good in the role. The problem is besides going up against Roseanne, having an American mediocre actor play the Master, not having the Daleks, that would have been a bigger draw. He was just in the one episode. But he is supposedly, I don't listen to the audios, like I said, shown really, really well, and the story's been fleshed out really, really well in the comic books and in the Big Finish audios. As a note, he does come back for a mini episode as part of the 50th anniversary special. Since the show has been on so long, they will have specials every 10 years for the 10-year anniversary. The first one had the first 3 Doctors. It was during Pertwee's time, but it had Hartnell and Troughton as well. It's called The 3 Doctors. It was not that long before the first Doctor, Hartnell's death. The second time, they had the 5 Doctors during Davison, and it had all 5 of the Doctors. Granted, they had to cut and paste, edit in Tom Baker. He had recently stepped down as a Doctor. He didn't want to go back so soon, I think because he didn't want to overshadow Davison. But, oh yeah, I was going to tell you, the 70s were the golden age for Doctor Who. Tom Baker's last season as a Doctor, 7th season, he switches up his costume. He switches up a bit of his attitude. He seems to be going through the motions, kind of phoning it in. He loses Romana, and that it's wearing this purple, weird, freaky outfit. And that is the beginning of the 80s. It was 1980, and that whole season is the beginning of the decline, and all starts going downhill. So the first 6 seasons of Tom Baker are fantastic. And the last one, not so good. Still Tom Baker, but anyway, so the 5 Doctors has all of them. Now, Hartnell had passed away. They got another actor to play him. who's kind of a look-alike. By the time you get to the 30th anniversary, the show had been canceled. This would have been 1993, but they did do a special, and the special included all the doctors who were alive at the time. Not Hartnell and Troughton, but it had Pertwee the third, Tom Baker the fourth. Man, did it have Baker? I don't think it had Tom Baker. But it did have Pertwee, and that was his last run as the Doctor before he passed away. But of course, Davison and Colin Baker and McCoy all playing the Doctor. For the 40th, it was still off the air. It was during the Wilderness years. Now the 50th it was on air, and they brought it back. They did something big. Eccleston, the Ninth Doctor, I'll explain him, and didn't want to come back. Problems with that. But the 10th and 11th Doctors are there, and the War Doctor. I'll explain him in a minute. And just a smidgen of the 12th Doctor. Anyway, Bob again. I spent all of his time talking about the other Doctors. Anyway, was only there for the one episode. Okay, and the mini-sode for the 50th anniversary. All right, then we go. Oh, interesting note. There was unbroken continuity between the original run and the first revival with McGann, because they bring back Sylvester McCoy, the 7th Doctor, to regenerate into the 8th Doctor, as we had always seen every other regeneration take place. Now, when you go from the TV movie, the 8th Doctor, into the 9th Doctor, Eccleston, for the second revival. What is Eccleston's first name? I'm so bad with names. I just keep calling them by their first name, or their last name. Christopher Eccleston. Eccleston. Alright. He was there from 2005 to 2005. He was only there during the 1 year, the one season. This is the first time we do not have a direct visual regeneration from the one Doctor to the next, from the 8th to the 9th. Now, remember, like I said earlier, this is because they were trying to reboot the show without necessarily reviving it, without there being a continuity. There were questions in the early days which way it would go, because they initially didn't acknowledge the history of the show. So I think this is why they didn't show that direct regeneration. Moffat later takes advantage of that to do what I think is one of the few brilliant things he did as a showrunner. And I will give credit where credit is due. Moffat, I doubt you're watching this. It'd be probably a waste of your time to do as such, because you already know more about the show than I ever could. But if you are, The War Doctor was absolutely fantastic. Bravo, bravo, bravo. And what you did, I think Sarah Jane was supposed to be the voice, but you got Billy Piper, and that was just fine. It was a good job with what you had at the moment, But yeah. Anyway, so the 9th Doctor, Christopher Eccleston, he was, like I said, there's a good bit of correlation between him and the 3rd Doctor. They had to revamp the show. They had to change it up, and he had to keep it going, or revive it. And he's a very different than his predecessors. He's more of a streetwise kind of guy. Wears a leather jacket. And have you ever seen Eccleston in any of his movies, or what was that TV show? The Leftovers. His best movie, I think, is Shallow Grave. Fantastic movie. Great actor. Fantastic actor. He had differences with the show's runners, with the higher-ups. Left the show after only a season. Real shame. He would have been fantastic for like 2 or 3 more years. That's horrible. But the good news is, the flip side of that, is we got Tennant. 10th Doctor, David Tennant. Is it E or A-N-T? Let's see. I always forget. A-N-T. David Tennant was there from 2005, the Christmas special. The Christmas specials are a big time for regenerating. All the way to 2011, I believe. No, 2010. Yeah, 2010. All right. Now he did, this is series 1, he did series 2, 3, and 4, which each one pretty much corresponded to a year, which would have been 06, 07, and 08. Now, the reason he's there till 2010 is there was going to be, which has become very common for Doctor Who, unfortunately nowadays, essentially a gap year. I love the BBC. I would hate an American company to run Doctor Who because, as we've seen with Miracle Day for Torchwood and a TV movie, it just wouldn't be as good. But I wish to heavens the BBC were a private for-profit organization so they could keep Doctor Who running like our American shows, and we wouldn't have giant gap years. I wish they could have their flavor, but with our efficiency, productivity. It's just sad. But anyway, so after his third series, which is series 4 in 08, like I said, 6, 7, 8, he starts with the specials, which run from Christmas of 08 to New Year's Day. He was only in 2010 one day, but to New Year's Day 2010. And there's 5 of them, and they're pretty good. Some people love the last one, and some people hate it. But I like it because it's an opportunity for one of my favorite companions, who is the grandfather of one of the other companions from the show. Anyway, but he is by far the most popular Doctor of the 21st century. By far. He was... he had a lot of teenage girls who were fans of his. Sex symbol or whatever, I guess, or romantic symbol. He gets romantic with and falls in love with the first companion for this revival in a way none of the other Doctors ever had. And it doesn't hurt that he was incredibly good looking. But yeah, easy way to remember, he's the 10th Doctor. Tennant, T-E-N, right there. But yeah, fantastic actor, fantastic Doctor. He's my third favorite after Tom Baker and Troughton. So T. Tom Baker, T. Troughton, T. Tennant. Easy way to remember them, although I don't know why you'd have to remember my favorites. But he was great, and parallel to Tom Baker, brought the show up to new heights, and had a really highly thought of run in the show, and just fantastic scripts, fantastic production values, because this is no fault of Eccleston's at all, but after he got the ball rolling, more money was given to the show, and some of the special effects in Eccleston's series were kind of laughable, but once again, they were infinitely better than the 20th century stuff, and obviously with more money they were able to improve all that. The sets, the designs, the actors, oh my gosh, some of the actors that were in here, just fantastic. Alright, he was heartthrob, that's what I was looking for. He was a heartthrob, he was charismatic, he was good looking, he was witty. He could do banter like nobody's business. And Eccleston had a little bit of just a tinge of dark. It was more of grief. You find out why later. He was apparently by this time, somewhere in the wilderness years, somewhere between McGann, the 8th Doctor, and the 9th Doctor, was a great time war that they only let on about over time during the show. And apparently the Doctor is the only living Time Lord. The Time Lords are his race, and they come from the planet Gallifrey, and I can't believe it took me this long to mention that. But his planet's blown up, everyone's dead, he's the only survivor, And Eccleston shows the appropriate amount of grief and brooding, a little bit of brooding for that. But anyway, so Tennant gets lighter and better, although he can still be dark at times, especially during the specials. All right, then the 11th Doctor. 11th Doctor is Matt Smith. Who goes from, there was a Christmas special that year, I believe, 2010. Yeah. There's always been a Christmas special every year. Let's see. No, it's Torchwood and K9. Shoot. Alright, Matt Smith, 2010. Until 15, all those breaks. 13. Oh yeah, all the breaks were Capaldi. 2013. Once again, with the exception of Eccleston, 3 series and the specials to cover the gap year. 3 series, which is series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then Capaldi does 8, 9, and 10. Once again, 3 seasons. Anyway, Matt Smith, just like Davison, they went really younger, like really younger. He was the youngest person to play the Doctor at the time. And, well, still is the youngest person ever played the Doctor. Whittaker is older than he. Or at least she's older than he was when he was cast. He has a lot of the fun eccentricities of Tennant, good banter, but he can be dark occasionally, not really, but old and wise. Even though he's young, it's constantly referred to as old eyes. Great actor, you'll like him. Problem is he, in his own right, I think he would have been deemed a little bit of a heartthrob and quirky and wonderful in his own regard. Problem is he followed Tennant, and Tennant is better looking, is quirkier, is more frenetic, and in the end is a better actor. You can see Tennant in such things like the Harry Potter movies, the Goblet of Fire one, I think specifically, and in some of the DC Universe stuff. Oh, and he's coming out in Great Omens, I believe, playing the devilish character, I believe. But yeah, wonderful. But anyway, Matt Smith is unfortunately a lot like Tennant, which was a great continuation for the show, but doesn't allow him to stand out as much as he would have otherwise. Oh, and here's the mark. One of the reasons Tennant left is because Russell T Davies left. He revived the Doctor Who, and he created Torchwood, Sarah Jane Adventures, and he basically had all 3 shows running at the same time. In fact, back then, there's nary a month that goes by where there's not some form of Doctor Who on the air, period. Torchwood or Sarah Jane or Doctor Who, something going on. And it's just constant. And unfortunately, life intervenes, and I think his partner got sick, and he had to leave the show. And so it's one of the reasons Tennant left at the end of his run, which is sad because Russell T Davies was fantastic. If you like Sherlock, he does Sherlock. Wait, no, that's Moffat. Moffat does Sherlock, which explains series 3 of Sherlock. But anyway, but yeah, so Russell T Davies, fantastic. Moffat has 2 doctors as well, Matt Smith, and 12 David Capaldi, I believe. Let's see. No, Peter Capaldi. I'm really, really, really bad with names. I call most people by their last name. Alright, which is why you get the last names right and not the first names. Capaldi. Now, starting with Capaldi, 2014 to 2017. Once again, they went much older and a darker, following the transition from the 20th century from Davison to Colin Baker, but went a lot darker. And he's so dark, he had problems for his first series connecting with viewers. Had some, oh man, the Peter Noster gang is some great companions that are during most of this time a little bit here. They're fun. One of those ensemble casts again. Anyway, he finally lightens up, does some fairly silly things, and there's some good episodes in there. But once again, declining quality. Although I must admit, in series 10, it picks up a good bit. The Master comes back in weird ways. I don't want to spoil anything. I've probably spoiled everything already. I don't know why I'm bothering not doing it here. But towards the end of series 10 has some really good stuff in it. Much better than 8 and 9. He was, once again, just like, finally showing some goodness towards the end. But love Capaldi. Great actor. And he'd been in the show actually a couple times before, one in Torchwood and one in the regular show, following Colin Baker, who had been in the show before he was the Doctor. This is starting to become a theme, actually. But great actor. In everything else I've ever seen him in, he curses like a sailor. I don't know how he kept from doing it here. But once again, good actor. And then we have another showrunner switch. Now, I didn't differentiate between the showrunners and the first, the 20th century stuff, because the differences are not as marked in a lot of ways. But Moffat's style, his convolutedness and everything is very different from Russell T Davies. And Moffat kept Russell T Davies' style for Matt Smith's first series, Series 5, which is why that series is really good and has some amazing episodes like Vincent and the Doctor, like the Pandorica Opens and stuff like that. But after that, starting with Series 6, he gets too clever for his own good, which is exactly the same problem he does with Sherlock Series 3. He gets too clever for his own good. With the 13th Doctor, we have a new showrunner again, Chibnall, who once again has been a writer on the show, just like Moffat was before he took over. All right, and hopefully Chibnall does well with the show. Hopefully he goes along and makes a great run at it. Hopefully he does not fall into Moffat's traps. Now, in an attempt to distinguish himself, because the showrunner gets to pick the Doctor, he gets to cast whomever he wants for the roles. I believe that's one of the reasons he has chosen, like I said earlier, the first female Doctor, Whittaker. Jodie Whittaker, I should put her first name. Alright. Jodie Whittaker. I think there's just one K in Whittaker. Yep, 1K. Alright. And she is 2017 to present. Alright. All we've seen of her is 15-20 seconds post Capaldi regeneration. That's it. We have nothing else to go on. Apparently she's a decent enough actress. I haven't seen her in anything, but I probably will. If I like her as the Doctor, I will seek out some of her other roles. She was very controversial because this has always been a male character, like taking James Bond and making him a woman, which hasn't been done as of yet, thank the Lord. And I absolutely despised and hated it when they made Jodie Whittaker the Doctor to start with. I can't stand them taking all of young boys and young men's heroes and making them female, as tends to be the trend these days, like Thor and Iron Man and, Starbuck and, the Doctor. But after, weeks and months of wrangling with it, anguishing over it, I came to the logical and inevitable conclusion that, it's just a TV show. It's one of my favorites, but in the end, it doesn't matter one hill of beans who plays the Doctor. It doesn't matter one hill of beans the gender, especially in a science fiction show. And in the end, as long as the show is good, shouldn't matter in any way, shape, or form. It is a grand break and departure from the past. And it angered many, many people like myself. My phone. But I have come to grips with it. I have come to accept it, and I'm still buying the DVDs, and I'm still watching the show, and I will continue to, for hopefully till I die. Because I'm hoping the show outlives me, all right? Even if I live another 50 years, I want Doctor Who to keep going. This was just especially in this day and age when there's so much political in everything. I mean, if this had been done with the third or the fourth Doctor, it would have made a lot more sense. But with 53 years before they did this, 54 years before they did this, it just seemed too steeped in politics and too much a desperate move to try to regain fans in an era of declining ratings during Moffat's tenure. I hope it is not. I hope that she lives up to and becomes one of the best Doctors of all time. Although Chibnall's episodes as a writer don't inspire me, I hope that he rises to the occasion of a showrunner, and I hope he does a great job with Whittaker. We shall see. The jury is still out on all this. We haven't seen any episodes starring her yet. But we will later this year. Let's see. And hopefully the show continues for a long time in an awesome fashion. If it follows the precedent from last time, it would, and the ratings continue to decline, either for people leaving the show, fans, because of her casting, or because the continued rating declines that Moffat did. Then it may end up being canceled and go into another hiatus. And we'll have to have another revival in 10 years or so. But I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that she's a good enough Doctor, that she's done well enough, that the ensemble cast will help, and that Chibnall's a good enough change in direction for the show, hopefully back to an RTD era, Russell T Davies era, that the show swings back big time, and that it goes back up in ratings, and that we have many, many more episodes. We shall see. There's almost figuratively nowhere to go but up, except for cancellation. Anyway, let's see. I'm trying to think of anything else I haven't told you that you need to know about Doctor Who without getting into too many details about all the various companions, all the various enemies, specific episodes, which we will go into when we are doing our hopefully weekly shows, Drunk Doctor Who, where we're talking about it. Oh, the only last thing. Doctor Who has annual Christmas episodes, and even if there's no other episode that year in the current run, the current revival, it will always have a Christmas episode. Usually that Christmas episode is very tongue-in-cheek. Usually it's not to be taken too seriously. In one of them, the spaceship Titanic is crashing into the earth. In another one, we're redoing Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and you've got some Narnia stuff going on. I literally call the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. it's like the Simpsons Halloween specials. They're part of the show, they're canon, but they're not really to be held to the same level of scrutiny as the regular episodes. I mean, just roll with them. If you have a Planet of Superheroes like they had in one of the recent ones, it's fun. Let it happen. This is one where Santa Claus shows up. I mean, it's just fun. Don't let those episodes shake you off and go, this show isn't serious. It's just like the Simpsons Halloween episodes. But anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I have no clue for how long I've been talking, so I have no idea how long the video will be. But we are going to hopefully do our show exactly the way I've done this video. No script, maybe a couple of notes, but no script. Organically, where we talk about whatever comes into our heads, the way a conversation should be, and hopefully slow enough that you can understand everything that I'm saying. I know a lot of videos these days are cut and pasted over many takes, and everyone talks really fast, and I think that is a layover from the days when the videos had to be under 10 or 15 minutes and you try to condense everything into as little time as possible. But if I would rather everything be incredibly organic. If we talk for 20 minutes, you'll get a 20-minute video that week. If we talk for 2 hours, you'll get a 2-hour video that week. I may put this online and call it episode 0 or intro to, or beginner's guide to or something. But anyway, if you have any other questions about any of this, I guess put it in the comments, which is something we'll have now. And hopefully I haven't messed up any facts or anything too badly. If you can tell by my knowledge, I love this show to death. It's right up there as one of my favorites. And it's one of the longest running shows of all time, with one of the highest episode counts outside of soap operas and animes and news programs and Saturday Night Live. But yeah, wonderful, fantastic show. Hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy watching it on your own, and I hope you enjoy watching us talk about it. Thank you so much, and good night.